Hello and welcome to Casual Learning. I'm your host, John Bannon. Today I'm going to review chapter 16 of my newest book, God and Our Superdeterministic Universe, the number one argument for the existence of God. This book is available on Amazon Kindle. Chapter 16 is entitled, No Such Thing as a Self-Caused Universe. Fallen Christian philosopher Quentin Smith wrote a paper in 2008 arguing that the universe is self caused and therefore does not require a God. Unfortunately, Professor Smith died shortly after the publication of Dr. Hanson's proof that the universe is superdeterministic and that temporal causation is not real. Dr. Hanson's proof came out in the peer-reviewed physics journal Physics Essays in June of 2020, volume 33, number 2, page 216. This was just months before Professor Quentin Smith died. So Professor Smith didn't have a chance to retract his publication, and he should have if he had read Dr. Hanson's proof. In any event, I will show you how superdeterminism proves that the universe is not self-created or self-caused. Uh, Professor Smith had two main arguments. The first argument is that each state of the universe is caused by the previous state of the universe, which is an assumption under the continuous causation in physics. And it goes something like this. So, X state of the universe causes Y state of the universe, which in turn causes Z state of the universe. And this goes on and on and on, both forwards and backwards forever. Now, I know there was a Big Bang, but Professor Smith would explain that there were still causes, an infinite number of causes leading up to the point of the Big Bang, and therefore the Big Bang itself never really existed. The actual state of non-existence of physical reality never existed because there was an infinite number of intervening causes before you get to the Big Bang. So there would always be the state of the universe being caused to exist, even as you get closer and closer to the Big Bang, but you never quite reach the Big Bang. So if every state of the universe has a causal explanation for its existence, then there is no need for a causal explanation of the whole universe. So if each state of the universe has a causal explanation for its existence, so this would be, let's say, V. Actually, it's a W. Then W causes X, X causes Y, Y causes Z. If each state of the universe has an explanation for its existence through a prior cause, then all states of the universe have an explanation for their existence. And therefore, there's no need to explain the whole universe itself because all of its parts are explained. So the whole exists because it is logically required to exist by the existence of its parts. Because each state of the universe can be causally explained, then there is no need for an explanation of the whole universe, such as a creator God. So this is Quentin Smith's first argument. Now, Dr. Hanson's proof of superdeterminism completely destroys this argument. And the reason is Dr. Hansen proved that temporal causation or continuous causation in physics is not real. Therefore, there's no actual causation going on between states of the universe. There's no temporal causation. That's not a real thing. So this can't actually work. If there's no actual causation going on, W cannot explain X's existence, and X's existence can't explain Y's existence, and Y's existence can't explain Z's existence. They're not causing each other to exist. They can't, because temporal causation isn't real. So there is no explanation for the existence of all the states of the universe. You can't rely on prior states to explain the existence of a given state of the universe. So there is a need to explain the whole thing. And Dr. Hansen showed that the universe is predetermined. Therefore, you need an explanation for why our predetermined universe exists and not 10 to the 10 to the 123 other possible universes. That means you need a God. A God who non-temporally created the universe to exist. Quinton Smith made a second argument, and it goes like this. There are only two possibilities. Either God exists in time, or God does not exist in time. If God exists in time, then God cannot create time without creating himself, which is impossible self-causation or causa sui. Self-creation or causa sui is impossible because in order for something to cause itself to exist, it would have to exist prior to its own existence in order to cause itself to exist, which is impossible. It's logically incoherent. So if God is subject to time, but God also creates time, then God would have to exist prior to his own existence in order to create the time so that he could exist. That's logically incoherent and impossible. So Quinton Smith is pointing out, if God is subject to time and he creates time, then that's a logical impossibility. That God can't be real. So then Quinton Smith continues that if God does not exist in time, then God's creative act of causing time would have to be the first moment of time, which subjects God to time. And then you get back to causa sui again. God being subject to time means he creates himself, which is impossible. Therefore, this God cannot exist. So Quinton Smith's argument is, well, in order for God to create time, that first moment of time, God himself would have to be subject to time in order to create that first moment of time. He would exist in that first moment of creation, that first moment of time. So God can't escape being subject to time. And because of that, God can't exist, because if God is subject to time, it's causa sui. God can't be real. Now, Dr. Hansen's version of superdeterminism gets you completely out of this argument. And the reason is because Dr. Hansen proved that temporal causation or continuous causation in physics is not real. What that means is that our universe is a static block reality without temporal causation or continuous causation in physics. What that means is that our universe is a manifold of abutting hyperplanes of space-time in a block reality. Now, because there's no such thing as temporal causation, then these abutting hyperplanes of space-time can't actually cause each other to exist because temporal causation is not real. That means that because they're not caused to exist, then they cannot be subject to time. So they're timeless physical realities. Abutting hyperplanes are timeless physical realities. Well, that means that if the universe consists of abutting timeless hyperplanes of space time, then God doesn't need to act in time to create a timeless physical reality. So God can create a timeless physical reality outside of time without being subject to time, because what he's creating is not subject to time either. So, because of that, because temporal causation is not real, God doesn't need to subject himself to time in order to create the universe, thus disproving this entire argument, which is fundamentally premised on the idea that the universe is caused in time to exist through temporal causation. Um, some people argue that because God interacts with humanity, then God must be subject to time in order to interact with humanity, because humanity is subject to time. But God is eternal. So if God is subject to time in order to interact with human beings in time, but God is eternal, that means God's time has got to be different than human time. So God has something called God time, and humans have Earth time. And well, there's a problem because there's no way for these two sorts of times to be simultaneous to one another such that you can interact on both planes. So if there's this problem of the interaction between the, the it's called the eternal time simultaneity problem, but you can't logically have two different times interacting with one another simultaneously and yet being different times. So this difficulty seems to be a disproof of God's existence, assuming that God exists in time, albeit God time or eternal time. But Dr. Hanson's version of superdeterminism gets you out of that argument as well. And the reason is that God is timeless. God is not subject to time. God does not need to interact in time in order to interact with human beings. Um, the universe is a static block reality without temporal causation. It's predetermined. That means that in order for God to interact with humanity, he predetermines what we perceive as that interaction into the universe from its beginning. It's part of the static block reality. So God can predetermine things like spiritual experiences and miracles to occur in a predetermined universe. And those things occur in what we perceive as time because they're part of our universe. They're part of the abutting hyperplanes of space-time. But all those things are predetermined. So God's interactions with humanity is not a temporal interaction. It is an interaction through a predetermined universe without temporal causation. So the difficulty in the eternal time simultaneity problem evaporates under superdeterminism because God is not subject to time and does not need to act in God time in order to interact with human beings because God's interaction is predetermined in our static block reality. Even prayers. If you pray for something and God grants the prayer, God already knew you were going to pray and already predetermined his response to your prayer in the predetermined universe. So your prayer and God's response are both predetermined to happen in our static block reality of a universe. Um, One last argument. The universe also cannot cause itself to exist through some sort of infinite back and forth causal and retrocausal loop of self causation from the beginning of the universe until the end of the universe in some sort of eternal block reality. And the reason for this is because temporal causation is not real under Dr. Hansen's version of superdeterminism. Therefore, there is no such thing as a self caused universe. All right. Hope you learned something. The key component of Dr. Hansen's proof is the proof that temporal causation is not real, or continuous causation in physics is not real. That's the key to understanding all these arguments under superdeterminism for the existence of God. And once you understand that, then you'll realize how all these older atheistic arguments completely fall apart because they all fundamentally assumed that temporal causation was real, like everybody else assumed. And that was a fundamental premise in all of their arguments. So when you pull that premise out from underneath them, they all these arguments, these atheistic arguments, they fall on their face. And that's the beauty of Dr. Hansen's proof that temporal causation is not real. Hope you enjoyed that. Next time I'm going to do a review of chapter 17 of my book, which is entitled Matter Need Not Always Exist. All right, take care, everybody.